Chapter 1. She knew she was asleep, yet felt wide awake, standing in a vast field covered in ladders that stretched upward from neatly trimmed grass towards the stars above. She felt drawn towards the ladder directly in front of her. She touched the first rung. It felt warm and inviting, as if something was encouraging her to climb. So she did. She climbed and climbed. With every step, a growing sense of accomplishment filled her, encouraging her to climb higher. The ground receded away, becoming distant. In time, she found herself standing on the ladder, catching her breath. The occasional wispy cloud drifting past. The sky had been that familiar, comforting hue of blue when she started. Now, when she looked up, it had darkened, the black of space staring down at her. Doubt stirred in her. Where am I climbing to? Am I really prepared? How will I breathe in space? Panic seized her. This was a terrible mistake. She wasn't ready. She blinked, and suddenly the ladder vanished beneath her. She was falling. All sense of calm and ambition evaporated instantly. This is it. I am dead, she thought. But then she regained her senses. She was not falling. Instead, she was floating, orbiting weightlessly, watching the earth sweep rapidly by beneath her. She could breathe just fine. She woke for the third time that morning, her dreams pulling her back to sleep, to a world where her life had some purpose and meaning, unlike her waking life. It could be worse, she told herself, stretching as she sat up. At least she was safe in her room, way up here in the gleaming tendrils of the city, far above the dreadful lower levels where people lived like animals and had to fight one another daily just to survive. She got out of bed, allowing the dress pot to clothe her, then sat in front of the mirror and watched as the makeup pot dolled her up. She disliked the effect, but had long since learned to endure it. One of the many compromises she had to make to keep the peace with her mother. The complexity of her look was always a forewarning of how her day would be. More frills and colors meant she would be required to attend and perform at yet another one of her mother's social events. Judging by her reflection now, she could tell that today was going to be a particularly long and exhausting. No one in the city had children naturally anymore. Instead, new humans were grown in external, artificial wombs. Except her. She had grown inside her mother's body and emerged in the closest way possible to a natural birth. The process had cost her mother a fortune on doctors, as well as having to endure great suffering and discomfort. Her mother was a prominent 20th century extremist, as were most of the city's social elites. They tried to emulate the glamour, the extravagance, and the wastefulness of that peak era, showing off their social status by living as unsustainably as they could afford, and venerating the oldest man to have lived on earth, born 1,000 years ago in the year 2012, founder of the city and their way of life. Having a baby that she herself had carried to term had been the move that had cemented her mother at the top of the city's social pyramid. Beyond that, the baby had not meant that much to her. Her mother was clever, cunning, and ruthlessly ambitious, lacking empathy and driven entirely by a desire to climb to the very top of the social ladder to assert her dominance. As a baby, she had always been brought out during social events and celebrations to be shown off. Her mother regaling the story of her torturous birth and life as a natural mother. Public breastfeedings had always drawn a big crowd, and her mother really knew how to milk the attention for every drop. However, as she grew from a baby to a child to become a teenager, the novelty faded. She got fewer invitations to attend these parties. Her 10th birthday had passed uncelebrated, a sign of her declining value as a social accessory. This suited her fine. She much preferred staying in her room, where she had created a world for herself, with hardware and technology excavated and repaired by savage scavengers from the lower levels, purchased by mid-level dealers and then sold off to the privileged higher levels who could afford to pay for such treasures. Her room contained virtual reality generators linked to the city's mind, enabling her to play in worlds inhabited by simple, digital beings she considered friends. These friends were in fact remnants of ancient training programs, designed ages past to help people improve all manner of skills ranging from dancing and social skills to fighting and creative arts. So here she passed her days. Wherever she was not forced to play her mother's pet for the amusement of her obnoxious socialites. Though she had a rebellious heart, she had learned early never to defy her mother. On the rare occasion where she had tested the boundaries, her mother's punishment had been severe, varying from loss of privileges to being cast down into the city's depths, where she would be tortured and devoured by the cannibalistic people rumored to live down in the deep roots of the city. The fear she saw in the other socialites towards her mother had long ago convinced her to take such threats to heart and never to challenge her. She had spent her childhood holed up in this digital world. It had kept her occupied and active and mostly sane. Yet something had increasingly felt off. Even though the simulations were near perfect, giving her the freedom to live any life she wanted, go anywhere, be anyone, do anything, create the world around her as she pleased, something remained unfulfilling. That particular day, the party had been especially exhausting. Her mother had forced her to dance with some vile, odorous men, whom she had designs on for some social or political reasons. These men had groped her openly, joking loudly that they might offer to buy her from her mother if she was a good girl. She knew her mother allowed, even encouraged these humiliations, occasionally using the threat that she would be sold off to one of these horrid men as punishment for bad behavior. She suspected her mother would already have done it, if not for the reason that she could only be sold once. The party shifted gears as its members reached the 5th drink state of inebriation. That was her cue, that her role was fulfilled, and she could now sneak away. Having peeled off her dress and put on her more comfortable clothes, she stepped out onto the balcony outside her room. Her room was large enough that she could jog in small circles around it. It was one room of 7 that came off a hallway that connected them to the dining hall that was slightly larger than all the rooms combined. The walls were covered in artworks from the 20th century. A reception hall and a large guest bathroom adjoining it, both decorated in works that were meant to show wealth and power. It was designed to exaggerate the size of the compound to guests and visitors. It was rare that she could go out like that, as the room was so high up, and most of the time it was too windy or too cold, so the safety locks would stay locked so as not to endanger her or others. The city did that a lot, looked after its residents by being as idiot-proof as possible. Most people did not question it, took their security for granted, and paid the price of their free will mindlessly. But she had not liked it, and had always felt the need to constantly test her boundaries, to figure out the limits of control. Her cage was tight. AI jailers kept watch on her, analyzing her actions and behaviors and knowing where she was at all times. Her mother had claimed it was to keep her safe, though she understood that the true purpose was to ensure she never embarrassed her powerful mother. Standing there, high above everything, looking out over the wildlands, surrounding the city, vast and untouched, she was thinking about how no human could venture there. The city's entire population was trapped within its limits, as she was within her luxurious prison, trying to hold back a tear of self-pity, again focusing instead on appreciating her life, that at least she did not have to suffer the horrible fate of the lower levels. Then suddenly, a butterfly swooped in and landed on the railings right in front of her. She had seen butterflies in her digital worlds, explored many branches of the kingdoms of life in her virtual jungles and meadows. This felt different. She could not pause or rewind this moment. It was now. The butterfly slowly fluttered its colorful wings. It had probably been blown upwards by strong winds. It certainly would not normally come so high. From her balcony, she looked down on the birds in flight. She often wished she could fly, explore the world, explore the universe, see all those amazing things that humans have built out there beyond the city's limits. A quick flutter snapped her from her daydream. Worried that it was about to fly away, she set herself to be in that moment with the butterfly, this real thing that had come to visit and touch her life. She watched the beautiful patterns on its wings, its every movement, and then it fluttered off, back down and away from the city. She kept her eyes on it until it disappeared into the distance. She stood in silence for a good long while, letting her mind wander. This experience had been so much more powerful than she had experienced in her perfect, simulated worlds. She decided it had to do with a knowing, the knowledge that this butterfly was genuinely real, living her life. This butterfly might finish its migration, find a mate, breed, and have babies that had babies that had babies, while the Sims were simply code and light. Then again, maybe it was something completely different. She got a good feeling from that theory and decided to go with it. She wanted more real experiences. She needed to get out of the cage. So she began thinking, searching, looking for a way. She had realized early on that she could create worlds within worlds in her Sims, and her monitors were not creatively curious. They would only watch one layer deep. So she had used this to explore activities that she did not want anyone to know about. Now she began to use it to learn and do research. She created for herself a tiny little cabin in the woods, in a valley between two gigantic mountain ranges, breathtaking sceneries where she would walk or glide around thinking about what she learned. Inside the cabin was everything you would expect in a cozy, well-clipped, well-equipped cabin, plus a doorway into a world another layer down. A small but tricky maze filled with traps and defenders that she designed so that if someone ever tried to follow her, she would be alerted. At a specific place in the maze, another entrance would lead to another layer. Here was her mind palace, and research rooms where she could learn about herself and how her prison worked, and try out ways to get around it. She figured out that these guardians, AIs, were not very smart, that if they had something that behaved enough like her to keep their attention, she could effectively trap them in a side reality and be free to do what she pleased in the real one. They would not think of looking for two of her. But just in case, she figured that it was safer for her to adopt an altered persona with unique behavior and look as different as possible from her normal behavior as she could. So she made a little side world next to her mind world, populated with various personality types. She used it to practice her other personality, trained herself to behave this way when dressed like her old self, and another way when in her other clothes. After a few weeks, she decided that she was ready to try it, see if it worked. It did, perfectly. The watchers that had watched her and her entire life were fooled by her AI replica, and she was free. Now what? She had not yet figured out how to actually get out of the complex. And where would she go? She had been told awful stories about the people that lived down below. Uneducated, willfully ignorant thieves who took anything that was not locked away or bolted down. That if they ever got their hands on her, they would do horrible things to her and use her to hurt her mother because they hated whomever was better than them, or so she had been told growing up. That line of thinking made her worry in a way that threatened to spiral into panic. Suddenly, she felt the absence of her watchers and the security that they brought. Yes, they limited her freedom, but they also kept her safe. She jumped back in, changed back to her old self, and changed places with her fake self. Enough for one day. But it had worked. She was elated. She had her first step towards freedom. She went to work on what the second step would be, and then the third and the fourth. She formulated a plan how she would follow some of the workers, who often were allowed into the complex to repair and tend household systems, and then go down to explore the world below. She practiced fooling her AI guards some more over the next few days, watching them watching her. She fine-tuned her fake self-decoy and then tried leaving it on for an entire day. It worked perfectly. She made some variations in the program so that if she wanted, she could leave it on for days even, without the AIs figuring out that every day was exactly the same, although she did sometimes feel that it was that way anyway. There, now I can be free, she said to herself, nervously excited at the prospect. She began to prepare in earnest food supplies, water, clothes, like the ones the servants from down below wore. She chose her window carefully. The day after one of her mother's grand parties, the upper elites would be asleep well into the next day, too hungover to notice anything. She had a plan on how to get out of the compound, an elaborate plan that turned out to be completely useless, as there was nothing keeping people in the compound, only out of it. So she would take the stairway down to where the complexes of the upper elites ended and where the real city began. Her heart pounded. Time to make history. She got into her clothes and swung her bag over her shoulder. The decoy had been running for half the day already. She was proud of herself for the work she had put into it, but also nagged herself for not having thought of doing this before. Oh well, she was ready. There was no one in the reception area, so she strode straight out the door. The noise made by the lock, click, set her heart flying. No turning back now. The brightly lit hallway led her between the various complexes out towards a common area. Her servant clothes rendered her invisible to the snobbish eyes of her mother's friends. They would not give their attention away cheaply. Walking along the luxurious, well-kept hallways of the tendrils that linked up the various residencies of the uppers, she was nervous to call attention to herself, keeping her head down and moving at a steady, deliberate pace. Then she saw it. In a moment, for she was alone, she gazed up through the glass ceiling and saw the majestic sky cable. From her home, the view faced away from the cable that marked the center of the city, so she had never seen it with her bare eyes. The cable rose out of the skyscrapers surrounding it, hers being the tallest, yet it was dwarfed by the sky cable. She had learned about the cable listening to her mother's friends. They considered it an eyesore, a relic from a time best forgotten, before the rebellion when the socialites took control over the city from the spacers, who had treated Earth like their colony to be plundered for the benefit of an unattainable dream of life in space. Information on this time was sparse, but the story said that a war had been fought and won by the people who believed in the 20th century way of living. The stories also spoke vaguely of Oldest, and how he had spoken for peace only to be betrayed by the spacers, one of their many sins, still cursed today, centuries later. The truth was veiled behind centuries of propaganda and misinformation. Whatever the truth was, ever since the war, the citizens of the city were unable to access the cable and many other parts of the city. She was next to the door that led to the stairwell. She waited a moment while a servant walked past a hallway and then went for it. The door opened and closed for her, and she started walking down and further down. This was going to take a while. On her way down, she passed one of the little Buds robots. She had read about them. They were the city's caretakers. No one knew how many of them there were left, but they were as old as the city itself. Their job was to make sure that all the essential parts of the city were functioning. They were always around, running errands that no one understood, but they never came into the compounds. Nothing essential to the city there, she guessed. The upper compounds had their own mechanical staff, the Pobots, sleek, intimidating, and utterly dependent on constant maintenance and reprogramming. A lesser design, the tech to make the semi-sentient little Buds long lost. The upper's robots were made to look all fancy and intimidating, but they needed frequent repairs to keep functioning, while the little Buds just kept going, century after century. She stopped when she came upon another little Bud that was tinkering at a wall panel covered in ports and ancient wiring. "Hi there," she said. "Mind if I sit and eat my lunch while you work?" The robot did not respond or react as she took a seat nearby, unpacking a small bundle of snacks. She watched in quiet fascination as she munched on some tasty leftovers from one of her mother's parties. The robot seemed to be calibrating or tuning something. Little protrusions flowed from its front, like liquid metal forming into solid shapes. It would enter a port and spin or wiggle or simply stay still for a moment, and then flow back into the front of the robot's front, as if it had never been. The robot had a transparent panel at the top of its head. Behind it, a light bounced around, growing and shrinking and changing colors, reminding her of a thought in motion or a feeling. She smiled at the idea, imagining she could read the robot's thoughts in the dance of its lights. Then she caught herself, probably nonsense, just her mind reaching for patterns in something utterly alien. Still, she found herself talking to the robot as it worked, telling it about her adventure in between bites. And that's when I watched that butterfly fly off. I just knew it was time to do something different, something real. You know what I mean? The robot continued replacing wires, seemingly indifferent. What I really want is to get out of the city, go and explore the wildlands. She went on and had a drink of tea from her thermos. I know what you will say, that it's dangerous out there, and that we are not allowed to leave the city, or the evil spacers will shoot us down from the sky or something, she said, putting words into the busy robot's non-existing mouth. But I want to go anyway, see more real things and explore. I will be careful and not damage anything. Why would the spacers punish me for that? She shrugged and pulled out a toothpick from a little dispenser she brought. The dispenser was said to be a relic of an ancient time. It generated carbon picked from the air and never ran out, as long as it had enough time between picks. After picking out her teeth, she noticed that the little robot had closed the panel and apparently finished its work, as it was now facing her with a blue light, seemingly looking at her, slightly pulsing a blue cyan color in a calming way. She lowered her hand from her mouth, and the blue light seemed to follow. "Are you interested in this?" she said, and held out the toothpick. The robot came closer, and an appendage formed with little pincers that reached out to the pick. Okay, she said, and handed it the pick. The robot grabbed it gently and pulled the pick into its body, where it disappeared. She then sat there with it for a moment, feeling as if it was curious about her, as if there were a mind behind that light and not just mindless obedience like the robots up top. All right, guess it's time for me to move on, she then told her new friend. It sat unmoving, blue light pulsing while she put away her things. It followed her a few steps as she continued down. Then a little while later, when she looked, it was gone. End of chapter 1.